Good day. It's good to be here with you. Today we're back in my office, back at my desk, which is probably a little messier than it has been in a few days. And I want to share a little bit of a story with you and some reflections in history about thin places, about Halloween. And today, specifically as we're filming this on Thursday, this is Purple Day, which is a day to honor those who have taken their own lives who are LGBTQIA individuals. And we honor those folks, and I think it's kind of interesting that it falls just a bit before Halloween. And I spent this last Tuesday evening with a few of our volunteers from Indiana in the Biloxi Cemetery. And it was for an event. It's called Story Night in the Cemetery. And the old Biloxi Cemetery is very interesting here. It's very similar to what you might see in New Orleans, with a lot of raised graves, a lot of old graves, a lot of old history. And so they had 10 individuals who were reenacting the lives of Biloxians who lived and who made an impact on the coast and on the city of Biloxi. And it was really, really fascinating. And a friend of mine, Cree Cantrell, was actually one of the reenactments, one of the actors, and he was showcasing or portraying Nicholas Christian Ladner, who was somewhat of a bit of a late pirate here and worked in the shrimping industry. But as I was in that cemetery, because cemeteries are always kind of challenging places to be in, right? Because it reminds us of our own mortality, it reminds us of loss and death. And this was not only to just be some sort of Halloween event, but it was actually to celebrate the history of the Biloxonians. What came to mind is this Celtic idea of a thin place. And I think cemeteries are thin places. They're those places where nirvana, heaven, earth touch almost, or where the human and the divine touch, kind of whatever words you want to use for that. The Celtics coined this phrase, thin place, as these moments when it seems that heaven and earth are almost non-existent and you're living in a very spiritual realm. The Celtics had a saying that heaven and earth were just 3 feet apart, but when you're in these thin places, that's even smaller or almost non-existent, and they touch. Well, there's another tradition that came from the Celtic folks besides this understanding of a thin place, and I think this relates to Halloween, it relates to graveyards, it relates to our own spiritual journeys, and that's the Celtic festival of Samhain. And Samhain was a time when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off evil spirits or ghosts. It's kind of our ancient origins of the celebration of Halloween. Because see, Halloween, I think, dates way back to ancient Celtic folks who lived in Ireland, in the United Kingdom, and in northern France. About 2,000 years ago, these Celts developed what they called this Samhain, or pre-Halloween. And the day would mark the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of a cold, dark winter, which was often associated with times of death. The Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. And for them, November 1st was the new year. And so they said, this is our thin place. So on the night of October 31st, they would celebrate Samhain, and that new year was November 1st. And they believed that their ancestors who were dead returned to the earth. And these ancestors would sometimes cause damage to crops. These otherworldly spirits they sometimes called druids, you might have heard, or they were priests, or they made predictions about the future. Because people kind of create stories, right, around their gods and their goddesses. And we create stories around the seasons. We create stories around our ancestors. And this was an important time for the Celts to kind of usher in a long, dark winter and to kind of comfort themselves with their past ancestors and those who had died, and to kind of prepare themselves for what could be a really difficult winter. And so to commemorate this event, they would build huge sacred bonfires. And the people would gather to burn crops and animals and sacrifices to what they understood to be Celtic deities, gods and goddesses. And during the celebration, the Celtic folks would wear costumes, mostly of animal heads and skins, and they attempted to tell each other's fortunes. I think that's really interesting, right? As they're moving into this long, cold winter. And so when the celebration was over, they went back to their homes and they relit their hearths, and that they had extinguished as they left to go celebrate. And it was really a time of coming together and a time of being together. And I think this reminds us that as human beings, we have this natural inclination to connect with ancestors, this part of our nature that we create gods and goddesses, and we create kind of sacred moments, right, to bring us into new places in our lives and maybe new journeys in our lives. And that's exactly what these early Celts did. Well, this is the origins really of Halloween, as you can see, right? Wearing costumes and fires and goblins and ancestors. And then, as historically has happened, excuse me, throughout history, is different popes, and especially the Catholic Church, has kind of taken these older celebrations, or what we might call pagan celebrations, or some might even deem heathen, which I don't agree with, but these pagan or other type of celebrations, and kind of turn them into celebrations in the church, like they did with Easter, like they did with Christmas. And what they did with Samhain was kind of create this time where we call All Souls Day, right? And that's usually November 1st, November 2nd, when we remember those who have died before us, those who have gone before us in the church. And it's kind of widely accepted that you celebrate All Souls Day, which relates way back to this Celtic festival of the dead. And now it had become a church-sanctioned holiday, probably in about the 9th century. And, you know, All Souls Day is very similar to Samhain, celebrating with costumes and celebrating with fire and celebrating with candles, as we do also for Halloween. We've oftentimes borrowed these old traditions, right? And now here in America, you know, we kind of have our Halloween parties, and we have our pre-made costumes, or you can go to the costume store and buy a costume, or you can make your own costume. But in the late 1800s, actually, there was a move in America to kind of mold Halloween into a holiday that was more about community and neighborly get-togethers. And that's actually when we started having home parties, and actually when they started going door to door and saying trick or treat, and collecting candy, because it was kind of a neighborhood community gathering, right? And so that's a bit about the history of Halloween, and especially around the Celtic Samhain. And so I encourage you today, as you're going about your day, and especially as you move toward Halloween, to consider thin places, right? To consider those places where it feels like heaven and earth touch, where the sacred touches the profane, or where our humanity touches the divine, whatever verbiage you want to put around that. But realize that I think at our very core, we are spiritual beings, and we have a draw to those things that are spiritual. We have a draw to our ancestors and to afterlife, and to the purpose and the meaning of life. And I was just talking to Kevin a bit before we started filming, and I think all of this is a part of our human search for meaning and purpose in life. And so there's a poem that I found a couple of years ago that's about thin places, and I kind of rewrote it a bit, but I want to share this poem with you as a way to kind of give you a blessing as you move into Halloween, as we move into Samhain, as we move into remembering our ancestors on All Souls Day, and as we just live life, and as we seek to find the sacred in the profane, and find the divine in our humanity. So here's the poem. Atop a high mountain, or in the dark valley below, in the corner of your room, or in the hustle and bustle of the busy city center, may you find a thin place, a time, or an event so unique, so full of wonder, so sublime. A place where heaven and earth collide, and the veil of separation is unusually thin. A time where you can almost feel angelic wings beat against your cheeks and see the divine smiling through. An event where your heartbeat quickens and you experience the mystery of the other in the mundane. A thin place is a threshold, a limit, a holy bridge, a door to the throne room, slightly opened, and in a moment in space and time in which we can dwell and dance and move if we are aware. A thin place is an encouragement, a sacred invitation to draw near, to approach barefoot in humility, in reverence, and in awe. It is both seen and unseen. Invisible, we see you. So may you in the wilderness or the countryside or in the city or here on the coast or wherever you live, may you find a thin place today. May you find a place where the human and the divine and the spirit and the mundane touch, and may you be blessed. Thank you for joining me. As always, we ask for your continued support through prayers and your financial gifts also. Peace.